Hello and welcome to a very special episode of the LFC Transfer Room podcast. We have a special guest on for today, Mo Chatra. Thank you very much for joining us. Mo is an expert on the financial side of football, especially Liverpool FC. He is also the host of the Money Talks podcast on Anfield Index Pro. You can follow Mo on Twitter for tweets about wrestling, MMA, and Liverpool via @Mo Chatra. Thank you so much for joining us again on the podcast. How are you today?
Yeah, good. Delighted to be back on the transfer room. So, especially after some of the good news we've been hearing from Liverpool. Great time to be on.
Definitely. Big topic of conversation, obviously. Dominik Szoboszlai. You had a very good thread prior to us finalizing the deal for Dominik, where you explained how Liverpool could maneuver the transfer, paying the release clause using a third party. Would you care to elaborate on that and how it possibly assists Liverpool in their summer rebuild for this season?
Yeah, sure. So I think it was Wednesday last week when reports started to emerge that we were exploring the deal, which made a change from the usual terminology of monitoring. So that got me intrigued. And at the same time, there was talk about, well, there's a release clause involved. And I thought, oh, okay, here we go.
We ain't paying it, yeah.
Yeah. So I then started looking into the whys and wherefores. And one of the things that I knew that other clubs were taking advantage of more regularly was this concept around what is referred to as debt factoring, which I refer to as something slightly different in my thread. And the long and short of it is basically it's a loan. It's about somebody else paying the release clause and then the buying club paying it in installments. And one of the things I've talked about at length over the last several years is that it is very frequent, very regular as an occurrence for buying clubs to pay selling clubs in installments, except on this occasion, sometimes when release clauses are involved, the whole fee has to be paid, done and dusted. Now, we had to pay, in this case, 70 million euros. That's the reported release clause figure. And the report from Germany, from Leipzig, through the very reputable Chris Williams, was that Leipzig were only interested in receiving the whole fee in its entirety. Otherwise, as far as they were concerned, the release clause was not activated. And if we went past that deadline that was reported of the 30th of June, that Leipzig were then able to request a higher figure, 80 million euros, 90 million euros, whatever. So it was worth the club's interest, Liverpool's interest, to get the deal done at 70 million euros, which equates to about 60 million pounds. In dollars, it's probably about 50 million in terms of the dollar figure. So Liverpool are not a club which sits on vast excess reserves in terms of cash reserves. So the likelihood of Liverpool having 70 million euros, 60 million pounds in the bank to just drop into the bank account of Leipzig was extremely unlikely. And so therefore they had to find the money from elsewhere. And we know that FSG don't make funds available for transfers. So what is the only other option? Well, there were only two real options. One was that quietly behind the scenes, the club had generated a sale for a minority stake, and maybe we'll touch on that later on, and funds were made available through that route. Or the more likely option is that the club tapped into funds from a third-party funder. They paid the money, and then the club agreed to then pay that in installments, but obviously for a slightly higher amount because the funder has to make its money. And so even if, say, it was £60 million, that over 3, maybe 4 installments, Liverpool Football Club will end up paying 65, 66 million pounds. So that in essence is the long and short of the deal. In all likelihood, I can't say for absolute 100% certainty. I'm not privy to the inner workings of Liverpool Football Club, but knowing that the club has very limited cash reserves, which is something that we know from the club's annual accounts, and also the fact that it would have generated slightly less money in the season just finished, and it will stand to generate slightly less money in the season upcoming because of the lack of Champions League football. If you piece all the bits of evidence together, it tells you that the club were not in a position to put down £70 million from its own finances into Leipzig, and so therefore they had to source the money from elsewhere. And the greater likelihood is that that money came from a third-party funder.
And it's not just the third party, is it, Mo? Because you're talking about getting a specialist broker, like you said in your thread, and the specialist broker then's got to go out and get a funder, which is two different parties involved in the transfer fee itself. So you've got fees and you've got charges involved as well. So that's why you get your money increase on just the £60 million fee. It's 66, as you said.
Yeah, that's right. And again, every deal is different. So, some deals, a buying club might be able to negotiate slightly lower kind of commission. And there are sometimes cases where buying clubs will go directly to a funder, but the beauty of a broker is that they're able to approach multiple different funders and to source the best available deal. So yes, there might be a fee to pay to a broker, but if they are able to get a better deal than if a club goes directly to one specific funder, then it's a price worth paying. So Macquarie is one of the names I mentioned in the thread. Just a slight correction, they're actually a funder, but there are brokers out there that will go to a Macquarie and they might go to other funders and look at what the best available deal is, and then be able to secure the best deal for that buying club, in this case Liverpool. And the other thing to note here is that when such an arrangement is being put into place, it effectively means that that funder is being told that future revenues from TV distribution rights will be made available to that to repay that debt. And so when that is the case, then that buying club has to also get the permission of the Premier League. And so again, that's another hoop that would have had to be jumped through in order to get the deal done. So what it all means is that when we heard about all of that being in place as an exploration of a deal on Wednesday, the likelihood is that Liverpool Football Club had already begun the wheels in motion, perhaps as early as the week prior. So we know that a discussion had been had on the Monday, and I believe that the agent of the player had flown in on the Monday to meet with Liverpool. The likelihood is that the wheels in motion had already been set at least a week in advance, if not maybe a couple of weeks, because we all know that with these types of deals, what is leaked out is normally well after the event. So if we're hearing that the club is monitoring, if it's exploring, the club in reality is several stages ahead of that.
Quick question on that front. So Liverpool has to obtain permission in order to get third-party funding to make the move. Is there a limitation on how often that can be used?
No. So, a club can, put together multiple deals in this kind of way, so using this type of facility. That said, if it is approaching the Premier League for permission and it has gone to the Premier League for, I don't know, £500 million worth of deals, and it's all being banked against TV monies, which in itself might only generate £170 million in a season. Effectively, a club is saying, right, we're trying to finance deals worth 3 years worth of TV money. So at that point, a club, the Premier League may be well within its right to say, look, we will not agree to this. You are trying to finance way too much based on revenues which are overlapping not only a full season, but 2 or 3 seasons worth of TV money. So at that point, they can be well within their rights to not sanction such a deal. But are there rules in place to limit the number of deals or the amount? No. But in reality, the Premier League will treat on a case-by-case basis. And if they think that a club is going to that particular source too much and is leveraging too much against future revenues, then it can certainly employ its discretion and say no. In a bit like, I don't know, somebody who's at a bar and their bar tab is way too big and they're saying, right, guys, come on.
Too much.
Exactly, yeah. So,
it's coming out of our pockets now, yeah.
Absolutely.
Having said that then, Mo, going forward now in the next few weeks, transfer window up to September the 1st, there could be more deals done, couldn't there? With Lavia being talked about, you're talking still about Kefren Turam, Inaccio's up in the mentions. Could this sort of thing happen again, where we do get another loan for these players? Because we know FSG, we know Liverpool in recent years that net spends 40 to 50, 60 million total, and we're already on 36 million at the moment with McAllister. Do you think this could happen again then with the rest of the window?
I don't think that the club necessarily needs to go down this route. I think with this instance, you've got to bear in mind that RB Leipzig were tied into this release clause situation with the player, with Szoboszlai, and the whole fee had to be activated. It all had to be paid in full, and we know that for the majority of deals. So if you look at Liverpool's more recent transfer deals, the bigger ones like Diaz, like Gakpo, like Konate or Nunez, all of those would have involved Liverpool Football Club coming to a structure for repayment of those deals with the selling clubs. So whether it was with Leipzig for Konate, and I think that fee was in the region of about maybe £35 million, which is Liverpool's favourite transfer fee. Every deal they seem to try and achieve is in and around that figure. So that would typically have involved 3 payments. So at the point at which the deal is done, saying, right, okay, so we'll pay 15 million or 20 million pounds. A year later, we'll pay a second instalment for maybe 10 million pounds. So we've paid 15 million installment 1 at the point at which the deal is signed. A year later, installment 2, another 10 million, and then a final 10 million pounds 2 years later.
Without the release clause, and there's no in between man. It's just a simple transaction between 2 clubs.
Yes, quite absolutely. Yeah, that's right. So if there's a deal to be had with Thuram and Nice, and also with Southampton for Lavia, then my understanding is there are no release clauses in place for either of the 2 players. So therefore, Liverpool Football Club instead will be looking to negotiate a structure for payment of those transfer fees. So say for the sake of argument, it's £40 million each for both Thuram and also for Lavia, 80 million in total. Liverpool Football Club may look to negotiate, say, I don't know, £10 million for the initial instalments for both players each. And the selling clubs may say, no, that's far too low. We would prefer to have more up front, so maybe £20 million each, 40 million in total. And they'll negotiate back and forth until they come to an agreement.
And they just recently changed the rule now. You have to make those payments within 5 years, right? Chelsea no longer can pull their shenanigans where they sign a player for 8 years and pay that off in 8 years, correct?
Yeah, so what you're referring to there is amortisation, which is an accounting term that has crept into football and become a very popular term, which in some ways a bit of a sad thing as well that, football fans having to take so much of an interest into a technical accounting term like amortisation. But here we are, because we have certain clubs, like one that plays in West London in the colour of blue, that is trying to take advantage of current rules. So we know that last week UEFA issued clarity around amortisation to say you can put in a 10-year contract with a player, 15 years. We don't care. You still have to amortise the player over a 5-year period. So just to explain again to those that don't understand, if Chelsea Football Club have signed a player for £50 million for a 10-year contract, it means that they can't account for that deal at £5 million a year, which is what the rules would previously have allowed them to do. They are capped at 5 years, which means that they have to amortise that over only 5 years, in effect, £10 million a year. And so, what we saw last year with a lot of their deals, which amounted combined to hundreds of millions, that those deals were typically, 6, 7, and 8 years. What it allows Chelsea to do is to spread the accounting treatment over a longer period, in order to make it look like there's less of an impact in terms of accounting for the cost of all of those deals. Whereas now they've been told, no, every deal can be amortized for no greater than a 5-year period. That works against Chelsea, much less of an impact against a club like Liverpool that typically enters into 5-year deals. That said, there have been 1 or 2 more recent deals that have been over a longer 6-year period, such as the Nunez one, which I believe last season was 6 years. I'm not quite up to speed with what the 2 recent deals are. I think there might be 5-year deals, if not, and if they are over 6, then they'll still have to be amortized over 5 years.
So when clubs look at these sort of deals, then do they look at the yearly outcome and the yearly income, the expenditure overall of the yearly, rather than the whole contract itself? Because a lot of people say, it's going to cost us so much and so much for a 5-year contract, but really it should be just looked at each year, because it's each financial year is affecting the club.
Yeah, so what clubs will do is do both. Look at the impact from year to year, but also the overall. Because if you just look at it purely in isolation, at what's the impact this year, and they ignore what will then be the cost impact for subsequent years, they could still be leading themselves down a path where they fall foul of the financial rules, whether they are the Premier League's financial rules or UEFA's rules, in subsequent years. So it would be foolish and short-sighted for any top club to be operating purely on an annual year-to-year basis. And you're right, they are looking at more than just transfer fees. They're looking at the overall package, agents' fees, the salaries, the bonuses. So all of these things are factored in. And, that's where, for example, though we heard that the transfer fee for Haaland last summer was, 50-55 million pounds, it's all the other costs, both declared and undeclared, which really make that deal much more expensive and way beyond the means of a Liverpool Football Club, if you see what I'm talking about.
Oh, yeah.
Exactly. That killed me this entire season when they kept up bringing up Haaland's transfer release clause and what they paid for him, but they're not mentioning the $1 million a week that he's getting, along with $20 million to his dad, $20 million to the agent. That obviously no club that's self-sustaining would be able to actually afford that. So that killed me when they were comparing what City paid, quote unquote, for Haaland versus what we paid for Darwin.
Yeah, Manchester City's fan base and their perception about their financial position is always a source of great hilarity. They will tell you that their 300 million plus of commercial revenue is all completely legitimate, and it is not influenced in any way by Abu Dhabi. many other people would seek to strongly disagree. But that obviously is part of the overall discussion around the small matter of 115 Premier League charges. But that's perhaps another discussion for another time.
Small amount there. Going from transfer deal then, Mo, to a certain sponsorship deal, Nike. We're coming into the last year now with Nike. Is it looking like it's going to be extended? Do you think it will be extended? What are they offering in terms of what New Balance did offer us? Because I know you've said before that New Balance, they generated us more money, but they wouldn't offer us enough to win the sort of the sponsorship deal that we give them.
Yeah, so just some very quick background to this. So the current deal is 3 years in, so there are 5 years in total. So we're actually going to the penultimate season of the deal, but the penultimate season is the season during which Liverpool will look to either negotiate an extension with Nike or to look at other options elsewhere, whether it's with Adidas or Puma or somebody else. Probably not New Balance, based on the fact that they went to court. So in a nutshell, the offer from Nike was £30 million guaranteed, plus 20% of net sales on kits and other merchandise, and 5% on footwear. And New Balance said, okay, we'll match that offer. And so Liverpool said, no, we don't think that has been matched. And New Balance says, yes, we have. Liverpool said, no, you haven't. So they went to court. And the outcome of the court case was that the court said New Balance have not matched the deal, largely on the fact that Nike were able to, as part of their deal, offer endorsements and collaborations with Nike athletes, such as LeBron James, at that time Serena Williams, who has since retired, and one or two others. I think even Drake might have been one of the names mentioned in the court.
Checks over stripes.
So New Balance don't have that high-profile set of athletes, and that was in fact one of the telling differences in the court case. And obviously Nike then entered into that relationship with Liverpool. But one of the things that emerged from the court case is that the New Balance deal was generating Liverpool far more money than Liverpool were advising local journalists. So they were claiming that deal was only generating 45 million. In court, it emerged that the deal was actually generating significantly more than that. And the reason that Liverpool were telling local media, look, this deal was only generating 45 million, is because they were then able to present the narrative that, well, by moving to Nike, we'll generate significantly more money. And that wasn't actually true. It was more a case of Liverpool felt Nike are a bigger, more high-profile company. The actual increase wasn't going to be that significant, largely because Liverpool already had a very similar deal with New Balance. And in the last couple of years of that deal, Liverpool's kit sales went through the roof. And as a result of that, Liverpool, in its final couple of years with New Balance, would generate huge amounts of money. I think in their final year with New Balance, they generated around 75 to 80 million pounds, is my estimate. And that, to put it into context, is on a level with the Adidas deal that they have with Manchester United. So that's the kind of money we're talking about. And I think since then, 3 years on, the Nike deal is generating maybe 90 million, maybe slightly more than that for Liverpool. So it is the most lucrative of all of the kit deals in the Premier League. And it's a great deal. And I think Liverpool feel they have a good relationship with Nike. And they have been doing more collaboration with them in the last 6 to 9 months. And obviously there's stuff going with Converse and LeBron. So I suspect that there will be a deal done. I wouldn't think it will be on massively different terms. So I think that the guaranteed sum might increase from maybe 30 to 40 million, for example. But I think nonetheless it generates huge amounts of money for Liverpool, and I think a relatively small increase in the guaranteed sum will probably materialise, and that deal will be extended. Though when I tweeted about that in another thread in the last couple of weeks, there was a lot of negativity towards Nike. A lot of fans felt that Nike don't really make much of an effort with Liverpool's kits, and they felt that if anything, they'd either prefer to go back to New Balance, though I don't think for a variety of reasons that's likely, or to Adidas. And again, I sense that Adidas are pretty committed with a number of other big high-profile clubs, and so aren't looking to enter into a big deal with another football club. Though that's not certainly beyond the realms of possibility. But one of the things for sure from the feedback was there's a lot of fans that are not exactly enamored with Liverpool's relationship with Nike, just purely because they hate the designs.
I'll probably hop into that. I found deals like previously shopping for like official merchandise with New Balance. You'd be able to find a deal much easier than you are with Nike. I feel like their stuff never goes really on sale, or they don't make enough of them that they go on sale, so stuff sells out. But this upcoming season, their designs look a little better. I'm at least I like the home jersey a lot more than this previous season, but we'll see.
Yeah,
what I find interesting there, Mo, what I find interesting there is what you said about creating the narrative thing, and this works for everything really. When they relay what they say to their local journalists, this could cover everything. This could cover transfers. This, to make a narrative to suit them, to make them look better than what they are. When say like you said that they made New Balance look worse than what it was, didn't they? They made their deal look a bit worse just to make it looked like they did the right thing by going with Nike instead of New Balance. And that, again, is creating a narrative. And they probably do the same with the transfers then, because when last 2, 3, 4 seasons, we've been interested, as you said earlier, monitored, exploring now is a new one. I said that the other day on stream as well, about exploring being a new word as well.
Yeah.
And when they say then at the end of it, there's been numerous journalists saying, like, we're interested in this guy. And then the end of it, we don't get the guy. They say we're not interested in him, and we won't interest him anyway. And that's what comes out of local journalists. But really, that's the narrative created because it looks bad on the club that they haven't got the guy they want.
It's a very interesting subject because, look, I mean, whether you're FSG in, FSG out, FSG in between, that's almost beside the point. One of the things that I've found, and I've worked in media for over 25 years, is that I have seen the way in which Liverpool Football Club's ownership is presented in terms of stories relating to the club is very different to how ownerships are presented and the narrative around them at the other rival clubs. So what I mean by that is if big signings are made, the patch journalists will make reference to how FSG have delivered such and such a player. Whereas if you look at the local media that cover a Manchester City or a Manchester United, a Chelsea, and Arsenal, the relative patch journalists for those clubs are not giving the credit to the owners. So they're not giving, in the case of Arsenal, the Cronkies have delivered Declan Rice for Arsenal. Instead, it's the club have signed Declan Rice. It's Manchester United have signed Mason Mount, not the Glazers have delivered Mason Mount for Manchester United. With FSG, the coverage is very different. There's a much stronger FSG angle about good news stories and trying to weave them into those stories, which I found is very different to how the same types of stories are presented from the patch journalists from the other rival clubs. So that's of interest. But yeah, just going quickly back to the narrative thing, I do find it a bit frustrating that there always sometimes ends up being a narrative, and sometimes it can be done intentionally to mislead fans, such as the kit and sales of New Balance versus Nike. But even with, for example, the main stand, which was completed some 5-6 years ago, initially the reports were that FSG are loaning the club interest-free £110 million to deliver that new stand. The reality was that FSG borrowed money and then they lent that money, and that money was borrowed with interest by FSG. It wasn't their money. And it was interesting that the Liverpool Echo then had to put out a clarification to say that, okay, that thing that we reported a couple of years ago, that FSG put their money into the club and gave them this money, actually wasn't their money. It was money from from funders. FSG borrowed it from the funders and then lent it to the club. So it wasn't outright lies, but it was just unnecessarily misleading fans into thinking, look at FSG putting their own money into supporting the delivery of the new main stand expansion, when the truth was something slightly different.
The PR team need an upgrade, and definitely an upgrade in terms of contract, because the work they do, the PR spin I see every single season is just ridiculous. And I've got to write about it. And regarding with that, then, and FSG, they seem to be learning a lot. They learn for the stand, they learn for the players. They're learning more than Chelsea Football Club, aren't
they? The what? Sorry,
they're learning more than Chelsea Football Club. Chelsea Football Club always send loans out, lots of loans.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Goodness. When whether it's players on loan or loaning money, Chelsea, especially with the Todd Bowley, the Todd father. He definitely likes to do a bit of wheeling and dealing. But I mean, it's a good sign in a sense that I think a year ago, Liverpool perhaps wouldn't have entered into the kind of borrowing arrangement that looks to have been employed to get Szoboszlai in. So it's one chink of light that, maybe FSG are trying to be a little bit more pragmatic. I mean, I think that they have utilised debt factoring in the past a long time ago, but in more recent times, they definitely didn't seem to have been employing that when perhaps there were certainly deals that could have been done, and we didn't get them done. Last summer, many fans were crying out for a midfielder, and one didn't arrive until we brought a player on loan, and that turned out to be a disastrous signing because it came so late with no real planning, and it was just a knee-jerk last-minute buy. And even the summer before, when Gini Wijnaldum left, again, we were saying, why don't we bring a player in to replace him? We didn't. And, sometimes when we're talking about 1 point being the difference between winning the league and finishing runner-up, that signing could have made a difference that season in 21-22. Instead it was all about ifs, buts, and maybes. But there we are.
Yeah, I felt like we've left ourselves at least one player short. Pick the year, it depends on the position. 1 year, we didn't replace Lovren. Boom, we lost everybody on the back line. This year, we didn't replace Gini, and then the degradation of those midfielders as well as the injuries just completely killed us last season. But to go back to kind of the Chelsea point and then kind of intermingling a little bit with the Saudi League, I know Chelsea got a ton of players off their books by selling them off to the Saudi League. And as we know, there seems to be there's businesses that are kind of melded in the background that don't really come to the forefront, as far as Todd Bowley having business dealings there. So where do you see the Saudi League in 5 years? Will they continue this rise of just paying overpriced on these players and keep building up that league? Will they be a factor in European competition in the next 5 years at all?
What we know about Saudi is that a bit like Abu Dhabi, they've gotten into football for sports washing is the long and short of it. It's all about improving the perception of that particular nation. And what better way to do that than through the most high-profile, most popular sport. And what better way even further than to do that by signing some of the most high-profile names within the sport. And the most marketable, the most well-known, the most popular name of all, Cristiano Ronaldo, was signed in January. And obviously they've now followed that up with a raft of signings and will do so for the remainder of this transfer window. And the long term with all of this is 2030. They want to bring the World Cup back to the Middle East in Saudi Arabia in 2030. Obviously, the World Cup is coming to your part of the world. We go in 2026, I believe it is. And obviously, the World Cup after that, the destination is yet to be determined. But we know that Saudi are making a massive push to bring the World Cup to their country. And if that were to materialize, they feel that by developing the profile of the sport within their country between now and then would go a long way towards helping secure the World Cup for them. So bringing these players in is part of that whole puzzle. And also on top of that, bringing in more players over the next few years will also be part of that. So I think that it will be all about bringing in big established names. So the likelihood of them signing a Szoboszlai, for example, I think is less likely. You know, a young player without much of a name, albeit, you know, amongst those that know, yes, you know, he has had a bit of a following, but, you know, to the general public, to fans who perhaps follow it less closely, Szoboszlai is still a bit of an unknown. And obviously, you know, we're all as Liverpool fans hoping that he becomes a very, very high-profile, world-class player. But those are the types of players that they'll be looking for, I think, even, never mind this summer, but in subsequent summers. So, you know, next summer, for example, they may well look to bring Salah to Saudi. And, you know, he is the single most high-profile athlete of Arab descent worldwide, the most well-known. So it's a logical move for Saudi to offer the player maybe £100 million a year, 2-year, 3-year deal. At that point, he'll be, 32, I think. And he'll still have a couple of years left on his Liverpool deal. So at that point, it might make sense for the player and even for Liverpool to part ways. You know, I still think he's got a good 3-4 strong years left in him. I mean, has he peaked? Has he perhaps? Maybe he has, but I think he's still got more in the tank. And
give him a midfield. Give him a midfield and watch him go. That's what I said to you. So keeping on the Saudi subject, then the Saudis seem to be taking over a few Premier League clubs. You know, they took over Newcastle, Dubai took over Man City. Obviously, these ownerships in Eastern Asia, they're looking to try to find Middle East. Sorry, they're trying to find different clubs then around sports as well. You know, that they're getting multiple clubs under their portfolios. Do you think Liverpool are one that they could be looking at over
there? Saudi?
Anyone?
Yeah.
Anyone in Dubai, Saudi? Anyone in the Middle East, really?
Well, my understanding is that when the club, depending on how you interpret what the club officially said back in November of 2022, were either fully for sale or were seeking investment. At that point, my understanding is there was very, very strong interest from the Middle East, from Saudi, from Qatar, and from one or two other investors in that region. And, you know, that they sought advice about what the club is worth. They carried out some due diligence. They had discussions with those that were representing Liverpool, Goldman Sachs and there was another party whose name I can't quite recall now, and they were commissioned by FSG to explore potential investors who might be looking to go as far as buying the club outright from FSG. And I think there's a lot that went unreported, which maybe in the future might come out. But all I can say is that there was very strong interest from that region. And Liverpool Football Club could easily have transferred ownership during the last season. But ultimately it didn't. That's not to say it won't in the future. I think Liverpool is still one of the most popular football brands in the world. It is, as we all know, one of the most popular football clubs in the world. And it's a club that has a great reputation, perception-wise. It's not a club like a Chelsea that is seen as a bit of a plastic club without that great emotion attached to it, that history that simply doesn't exist in the way that it does for Liverpool. There are very few clubs that have that combination that Liverpool does. You know, Liverpool, Manchester United, Barcelona, Real Madrid, maybe a Bayern Munich you can throw into the mix as well, AC Milan. You know, these are the absolute cream of the crop football clubs. And Liverpool would still be a very attractive proposition for investors with very deep pockets from that region. But at the same time, ultimately, the ball is in the court of FSG. And if they don't want to sell, then, you know, potential buyers can't force them.
Touching a little bit more on club ownership, I believe they're making it easier now for multi-club ownership to come into play. Now we've seen that with Man City. Now Chelsea are looking to do the same. I believe they're purchasing a stake in Strasbourg as well. Do you think allowing this is just gonna greaten the divide between those top clubs and those middle clubs to even the bottom clubs when you have these top clubs owning multiple clubs across different continents, being able to hoard talent and then just trade between themselves? Do you see this as the future, or are you in agreement with them making it easier to own multiple clubs, or what are your thoughts?
I like the idea in theory. I think in practice, it's all about smoke and mirrors and financial shenanigans. I think that is where, if you look at a City Football Group, which has, I think now it's got over 10 clubs. In theory, the idea is you send young, promising up-and-coming players to these smaller clubs who can develop, get game time, and then feed up towards the bigger clubs. And ultimately, in the case of City Football Group, to come up into Manchester City Football Club. How many cases of players have we seen who've been farmed out to, you know, the feeder clubs in, you know, New York and other parts of the world, then coming up into Manchester City Football Club? Hardly any. And yet,
Jack Harrison's the only one that comes to mind, and he doesn't play for City. He got loaned to Leeds and then sold to Leeds.
Yeah,
I think Red Bull have been the best at doing that, regarding the Salzburg and the Leipzig.
Yeah, that's it. And I think that's one of the few high-level, genuine cases of a system being set up in the right way. In the case of City Football Group, it's all about trying to help ultimately Manchester City get around the rules, around financial fair play. And it's about being able to hide costs here, hide costs there, in order to make it look like Manchester City Football Club are a self-sufficient football club. And there will be City fans who will look you in the eye and seriously tell you that City Football Club, Manchester City Football Club, are entirely self-sustaining.
I mean, they are. Dubai is paying for everything, so they are self-sustaining in the fact that they're funneling money from every which direction. And over the weekend, we had a report from the Times that revealed that Manchester City was given 2 payments of 15 million back in 2012 and 2013, and they were disguised as payments from their main sponsors, but they're obviously not. And this is one of the 115 charges that they're currently being investigated for.
And that was at a time when their commercial revenues were much smaller than they are now. So imagine what the figures involved are at this stage, when their commercial revenues are officially north of £300 million. But again, that's another subject for another time. But going quickly back to Chelsea, so what we know is that one of the major investors in Chelsea, the Bowley consortium, is Clearlake. Clearlake had significant investment come in from Saudi's PIF, who also own the majority of Newcastle United. And so lo and behold, Chelsea Football Club, who are desperate to sell players and offload players, are selling players to clubs who are majority owned by PIF. What a coincidence. Wow. And so look, what it ultimately means is that this new multi-club ownership that Todd Bowley is trying to set up with Strasbourg and other clubs will be added to it is all really, again, about smoke and mirrors. And it's about trying to improve the financial situation in a way that is artificial, ultimately. You know, if this was operating without any Saudi involvement, would they have been selling all these players like Koulibaly and Kante to Saudi clubs for inflated transfer fees? 100% not. But we know why it's being done. Chelsea desperately need to meet certain income levels from transfer fees, or needed to by the 30th of June in order to avoid falling foul of fair play rules. And so, again, that's why I'm not a fan of it in practice, even though I'm a fan of the concept in theory. And that is why we, again, have something to be worried about with the Chelsea arrangement. And if Manchester United are bought out by essentially Qatar, because Jassim is very much a front man in the way that Mashiri was at Everton, where everyone knew, or most people knew at least, that in the background it was Usmanov and his money that was there to finance that club, and that all went pear-shaped. So in the same way, I wouldn't be surprised if Qatar ultimately do take over United, that within 2 or 3 years, we don't start to see a multi-club model being put in place there. And it will be for much the same reasons as we've seen with City and with Chelsea, all about trying to get around the rules.
We've got dodginess at City with Sheikh Mansour, got dodginess at Chelsea with Todd Bowley. Let's speak Mr. Henry and FSG. And there, I say dodginess. I think dodginess at certain times, because our commercial revenue has gone up 110 million since 17-16 season. Our Champions League this season, you know, we're missing quite a bit of money out of Champions League, but that does affect the wage bill then as well, doesn't it, Mo? The wage bill is not as high. We've lost players as well that have had high wages. How much has it actually affected the club's finances missing out on Champions League?
So in the lead up to the end of the season, when it looked increasingly like Liverpool would miss out on top four, we had journalists put out stories about £100 million hit on Liverpool's finances. And it almost seemed like they were trying to warm fans up to yet another summer of miserly spending.
Yeah.
But it looks like, in fact, it won't be miserly spending. That, you know, we've already spent, you know, just shy of £100 million, and we'll probably, all being well, spend closer to 200 million, if not more. But with the whole situation, with FSG, look, the actual hit on the finances is not as severe as those reports would make people believe. Liverpool's revenue for the season just finished, 22-23, would have ended up in the region of about £580 million. Now, in the season when Liverpool nearly won the whole lot, everything, the revenue was 594 million. So despite the fact that we finished outside of the top four, that we went out in the last 16 in the Champions League, we still generate almost as much money as the season where we won everything. And the reason being that the deals for the Premier League and some commercial revenue and even a bit of match day were all up. So it helped to offset the impact of coming out of especially the Champions League early. Next season, we have no Champions League football. My estimate is that the revenue overall will be about £570 million. So it's only a reduction of £10 million. And if we qualified for the Champions League for next season, and if we went to the semi-finals or the final, we'd probably be looking at about 640 to 650 million pounds. Mm-hmm. But what I'm saying is that the actual impact on our revenue last season compared to what we're likely to generate next season is only about 10 million. Because again, next season, we are seeing the increased revenue from match day from the new expanded Anfield Road end. We are seeing new income coming in from the enhanced Standard Chartered deal. We are seeing better deals on the television distribution rights side as well. So the actual hit year on year is nowhere near as severe. And as you noted, the wage bill should be down. Our wage bill has increased significantly compared to, say, 16-17, when it was only just over 200 million. And in the most recent season for when the accounts were published, which was 21-22, that wage bill was 366 million. Last season, it would have likely been slightly less than that. In the forthcoming season, it will be in all likelihood less than that even further, because there won't be significant Champions League bonuses to be paid out. And we've seen a number of big earners leave the club in your James Milners, your Roberto Firminos, Naby Keita, Alex Oxlade-Chamberlain. So the overall impact is far less than perhaps had been made out in certain reports. And so that, again, is part of the reason why the club are in a reasonable position to finance some of the incomings that are required over this summer transfer window.
So once again, it kind of goes back to what we touched on earlier, the spin and the PR that FSG put out.
Narratives.
The narrative. There you go. Thank you. So
yeah, I mean, and that's one of the things that I try and do in some of my threads, is to kind of dispel some of the kind of misconceptions, because like I said, I have worked in media for over 25 years and I know how it works, and I know, some of the kind of narratives that, certain people like to push through journalists. And, I just try and be a bit of a straight shooter with all of this. Just look, tell it how it is. And, whether it's portraying the club in a good light or if it's not portraying the club in a good light, I think it's worth fans understanding how things really work and trying to get beyond the headlines and beyond the spin to understand the real story. And, there'll be certain people that will think, well, no, I believe the club, this guy or other people, they're just making it up for clicks and for followers. And that's not the case in my I'm just trying to say exactly how it is. And if people choose to believe the spin, that's up to them.
Ultimately, we're Liverpool fans, aren't we? Not FSG fans, and that's what I sort of run more than anything. I don't care if it means not getting exclusive for a club. For example, say if LC Transfer all of a sudden got an email from the club saying, "Do you want to be in press conference and things like that?" I don't think we would do, because we've been on FSG's back, especially myself. But I prefer to search for the truth, like you just said. I prefer to be hard hitting. I prefer to be honest about things over anything else before exclusives from the club and things like that. I'd rather call out what I think is wrong if it's against an ownership, making making me put the club first, if that makes sense. I want the club to succeed first, foremost. Forget the ownership. I don't care who the owners are. If I think they're putting things in place where it's halting Liverpool be successful and holding Klopp back, then I'll say it. And that's how it should be, shouldn't it, Mo?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, there shouldn't be any real loyalty to, multi-billionaires. We're all fans of the club, not the owners. Well, at least the vast majority are more loyal to the club than to the owners. And that should always be the case. The owners are just custodians. They'll come, they'll go. These current owners bought the club as an investment. And the idea being, they don't have an emotional attachment to the club. They didn't buy it without any great knowledge about Liverpool Football Club. They perhaps couldn't even point it out on a map when they bought the club. That's not to say that they haven't done some great things for the club. Of course they have. They brought in Jurgen Klopp. They brought in pulled a masterstroke in appointing Michael Edwards to a key role. Something I, at the time, was hugely dubious about, but I think that was one of their great decisions. They have expanded Anfield. They have delivered the AXA Training Centre. So it's about being balanced, giving credit where it's due, but when mistakes are being made, when they aren't doing things that are keeping the club as competitive as it should be, then they should be called out. They should be scrutinised. They should be challenged. And there are some that feel, no, our job is not to challenge. Our job is to support every action of the owners, unless it's something so egregiously bad that, that there's no defending the indefensible. But, we see far too much by way of arguments where even in the last couple of weeks, there were some fans getting despondent that, we've signed McAllister. Are we going to sign anyone else? And fans saying, look, we need more players. And there were other people saying, be quiet. You don't understand what the club's finances. Fans shouldn't care about that. It should all be about, we want this club to be as successful as possible, to be as competitive as possible. That should be our primary focus. And, this is where I think some fans become too misguided and get into these phony Twitter wars for all the wrong reasons, to the point where they are perceived to be fans of the ownership above the club. And it's a bizarre situation that, again, I don't see to the same extent with other clubs. When the Cronkies were seen by Arsenal fans to be underinvesting, I saw very, very, very few Arsenal supporters that were supporting the Cronkies. And the Cronkies actually changed their ways. They changed their business model. They actually started investing their own money into the club. And we've seen that's why they've outspent Liverpool. Their revenues have been way smaller than Liverpool Football Club over the last 5 years. Now, granted, their wage bills been a lot smaller, but even despite that, they've still, proportionally speaking, outspent Liverpool Football Club. And that has been a key factor in their turnaround from being a club that was barely able to make top four for a number of years to now, in the last season, be able to compete once again and challenge for the league. And obviously they did a Spurs and choked at the end of the season, which was somewhat amusing. But nonetheless, they have turned things around and are sort of heading in the right direction. And the key factor behind that is the Cronkies acknowledging, look, our self-sustaining ways need to be adapted. They need to evolve now, and we need to do something different. Otherwise, we'll perennially finish outside of the top four, and we'll just be stuck in this vicious circle of losing our best players, generating less money. And so we've got to break out of this cycle somehow. Let's invest our own money. This is one of our key assets. Let's make it happen.
Definitely. I hope FSG dips into that at least a few times in the future, because again, to compete with Man City or Newcastle, who's on their way up, even though they're not spending as crazily just yet, you definitely have to invest a little bit more than what FSG has done. And I prefer a lot less spin on, we built this stand, when in reality you didn't. the club paid for it in the end. You didn't put in your own money. So, but hopefully they see the light, and this is the beginning of them seeing the light, because missing out on Champions League can't happen again.
Yeah, I mean, I think that, it can be easy to be knee-jerk as well. I mean, we are seeing investment. We are seeing players being signed. You can certainly argue that that's the bare minimum, and again, it's all about looking at the longer term. That, okay, if we do invest heavily this summer, does that mean we'll have a repeat of the previous 5 years where we saw heavy investment in 2018 and then we saw meager investment in subsequent years? So will we see the same this time around, where big investment this year, and yet if we need to, for example, replace Van Dijk, if Van Dijk has a poor season and it looks like his legs have gone, and we need to sign a top centre-back summer 24, will we be told, well, the funds are not there because we're paying the fees for all the deals that were done in summer 23? And so that would be my concern. And that is why, if there is a minority investment and money coming in through that route, great. But longer term, I'm still dubious about the FSG model, because a lot of it is predicated on selling players. But we have seen in the last few years the club really struggle to sell players. Only one player since Felipe Coutinho left 5.5 years ago has been sold for over 25 million in Sadio Mane last summer. That's it. And if you look at other clubs, they are, like even Manchester City have been selling a number of players for very big fees. And that is something that we've struggled with. And part of that is ultimately down to the manager. The manager has, in some cases, been reluctant to see players move on. And too many players have been allowed to run their contracts down and leave on a free. And that doesn't sit with that FSG model, that, you buy players and then at a certain point you sell players to generate those funds. And if you're not selling players and you're not able to generate those funds and you've got this huge wage bill, then where's the money going to come from when you need to invest in your squad? And so that's why longer term, I still have my reservations about the FSG model. And that's why I think it either needs to adapt or they need to concede defeat and say, look, ultimately, we as owners, we try our best. We've taken it to a certain level, but maybe the time is now to cash in. And for others that are in a better position to invest their own money or operate in a slightly different way, can maybe do things differently to make Liverpool as competitive as possible.
And before we finish then, mate, I think you got it spot on in terms of talking about next season. I think it will take a hit on us next season. And this is why, for me, I still want FSG to leave, because I can't see them wanting to change their ways. They've been here, 10 years now. And this sustainable model worked when we had Michael Edwards. It worked when we was on the up, when we could take chances in the transfer window. We could take a chance on a Salah at 35 million. We could take a chance. And when you're at the top, to stay at the top, you can't take those sort of risks. You need to start spending on competitive level with even just Arsenal. We'd have to spend, obviously, City money. We ain't got City money. We'd have to spend Chelsea money. Arsenal level money is what we should be spending every single year. Don't you agree?
Yeah, I mean, the evidence is clear that there has been an underinvestment in the squad. And that is what led to a midfield group last season that were completely inadequate. And even if it was one midfield signing every summer, 2019, summer 20, summer 21, summer 22, all of that kind of age range of 22, 21, 22, 23, for those 4 summers, we wouldn't have had the problem last season that we saw, where all of the players were either too injury prone or their legs had gone. And it was such a glaring weakness. And it could have been avoided by proper succession planning. And now they're having to play catch up by having to sign 3 or 4 midfielders in one window. That is the sort of thing that, a proper football club doesn't make the mistake of. So, ultimately, if FSG were making funds available last summer, and it was Jurgen Klopp who was refusing, and it was being too particular in saying, look, if it's not Tchouaméni, and if it's not Bellingham, then I'll wait another year. Others disagree with that and say, well, actually, no, we feel it was FSG not releasing sufficient funds to get the type of player in that Klopp wants. Who knows? Only they really know. But ultimately, the proof is in the pudding. And we saw underinvestment, whether it was down to the ownership or the manager or both, underinvestment over too many summers. And as a result of that, we're having to play catch up when that shouldn't have been the case. We don't have to, you're right, Rigo, we don't have to be spending City levels of money or even Chelsea levels of money, but we need to spend money because the way that we play football, it ages players prematurely. We are seeing players, by the time they hit 30, hit their peak. They are, even an Andy Robertson, he hasn't even hit the age of 30. Fabinho hasn't hit the age of 30. And yet, we have seen these players now go on to the other side of their peak, it's a very demanding style. So when you operate in that way, you need to have a healthy turnover of your playing personnel. And that's why the onus is on the ownership to make sure that the funds are there, that the model is in place to facilitate that. And if you are struggling financially to get enough players through the door and you're having to keep players beyond their shelf life, then the model isn't optimal. And that is why FSG have to adapt it, or they need to look at potentially cashing in. And that's a point that I've made over a couple of years now. And that, again, is nothing to do with are FSG great owners or bad owners or somewhere in between. It's about purely what is in the best interest of Liverpool Football Club and being something about acknowledging the context. It's seeing a Newcastle United emerging and spending serious money. It's seeing Chelsea, for example, who, granted, have spent very haphazardly, have still signed many very good players. And if they just refine that strategy and get the right coaching, which they think they have done in Pochettino, and get those players singing off that same hymn sheet, they could be a formidable force. And you're seeing, City still continue to be the smartest operator in the room. Even a United are being a little bit less crazy with some of their buying. They're still making some very strange signings like Mason Mount. But, some of their most bizarre kind of deals not entirely being eradicated, but, getting a little bit smarter. So the point being, our rivals overall are not kind of sitting and standing still, I should say. They're trying to improve in the way that they operate, in the way that we did so successfully 2016 to 2018, when we weren't outspending everyone, but we were buying so smart. And that's where we need to get to. But it requires a commitment to investment in the squad. And that is where FSG ultimately have to take responsibility. And I'm hoping that they've learned their lessons and are trying to be a bit more pragmatic now. So, let's come to the end of the transfer window and then make that judgment ultimately. But the early signs are promising that for this summer at least, we'll see the right kind of movement. But I still have concerns that come next summer, we'll be hearing the same stories that, look, the funds are tight.
And quite unfortunate that we're pretty much the only big club that has to worry about the owners spending money or investing properly. It factors into so many other conversations that even as fans, we rule ourselves out of these star players just because, FSG is not going to pay that. FSG is not going to pay that. But hopefully we see it turn, or at least they give the sporting director a few more million to take chances on these players who can become stars, or if not, we can then sell them a couple of years down the line after a little bit more development. But.
Yeah. every signing won't necessarily be a success, and we've seen where we've gone down the cheaper route in the last couple of years. We've seen us try to bring in a Ramsey or a Carvalho for very, very small fees, and they have, Ramsey might still turn out to be a good player, but the early signs are, even despite the injury issues that he's had, that signing will not turn into a massive success. But at the same time, you have to be adapting to and acknowledging the environment around you. And that is where I think Liverpool have really, at times, shown a bit of arrogance that, look, we were so smart 2016 to 2018. We nearly won everything in 21-22. If it ain't broke, don't fix it. So that was the attitude that we took, that, these players nearly won everything, so why do we need to go out and spend when they nearly won everything? So I'm sure they'll go again. And we saw that, in fact, they crumbled in 22-23. It all caught up with them. And that was about not acknowledging the environment and almost burying their head in the sand and a bit of arrogance. So last season, you'd like to think it was a humbling experience for the owners, the coaching staff and others within the club that make decisions. That, look, we aren't, going to be outsmarting everyone at all times. Sometimes, we have to be pragmatic, and that's why I'm glad that we've got this business done. But ultimately, it's that model that we really need to see adapt and evolve. And just because we've signed a couple of players, it doesn't mean that model has adapted or evolved. And I think we'll only be able to really judge that over the course of the next maybe 15 months as we see out the remainder of this window. We then go through the January window and see out the 24 window. That will be the big litmus test. If we see heavy investment next summer, I'm not saying that we need to go out and sign 5 or 6 players next summer, by the way, but it might be that there might be a couple of very big players that we have to replace for a couple of different reasons, like a Mo Salah and a Van Dijk. And it might be because Mo goes to Saudi and because Van Dijk's days as a top-level player are numbered. And if we need to sign 2 80, 90, 100 million pound players to replace them, will we financially be in a position to do so? Or will the ownership have the cojones to get that deal done or those deals done? That will be the big litmus test.
So ultimately, regardless what happens this summer, we can't judge whether FSG have changed their ways or anything like that until next season. Like you said, I think even if it's this summer, we do spend a bit. Is that then just wanting them to not lose their value of the club, if that makes sense? We don't want the value of the club decreasing. Ultimately, in the end, they want to sell at some point in the future, and they want to sell it at the highest value it could be. And this summer is so important in terms of the rebuild. Having finished 5th last season, this could be the start of a downfall in terms of not just the team, but in terms of value of the club. And that's the last thing they want. That's why this summer is so. This summer could be a big summer in terms of investment in, just because before that downfall, this is make or break for them into this summer.
You need to maximize the time you have with Klopp. He's here until 2026 unless he signs an extension. And we've seen, you said it earlier on the pod that they could have just made one signing each of these years to replenish and refresh and maximize the primes of Salah, Virgil, Alisson, etc. to get us to winning trophies and put us in the best possible position. And they haven't. We have to be honest. They haven't. They haven't overshopped in any position at all, unfortunately. But we'll see. We'll see how it goes. But definitely, I'm with you, Mo, on that. This summer, January, and then next summer. That's how we can fully judge FSG if they change their model or not. there's no more Coutinhos that we can sell.
No, there isn't. I mean, the players that were in that kind of price range, like a Mo or a Van Dijk, their kind of value peaked out maybe 2 years ago.
Yeah.
Summer 2021, you could have commanded 100 million plus for a Mo. And though obviously Van Dijk was just coming back from injury, he was still regarded as the elite centre-back in world football. And 2 years on, he's now past the age of 30. He would still command a fee of 50, 60 million. But yeah, we don't have those £100 million plus players.
I think the Mane sale sort of sells that as well, doesn't it? The Mane sale, he was like £100 million player who ended up selling for 35 because he'd been past his peak. It's proven there that we can't sell these players anymore for that sort of price.
Yeah, and it's a bit of a balancing act because obviously, you don't want to be moving on your best players when they're in their prime, but the sweet spot is knowing when to move them on when they still command a high fee, when they're just about to go past their prime. And sometimes that's very difficult to judge. You might look at a player and think, right, they've still got a couple of years left, and they just fall off a cliff. Like Fabinho last season. I mean, granted, at the end of the season, he did improve, but for the majority of last season, he was nowhere near the player that we saw 2-3 years ago. And granted, in the end of the 21-22 season, there was some signs that he was starting to go, but it seemed more like, okay, the season was catching up to him. It had been a long season, and yet that poor form continued into much of 22-23. So sometimes it can be difficult to predict, but at the same time, there's also evidence that Liverpool have clung on to far too many players far too long. And, there were other players that we know that, Klopp wanted to retain, and it was the players who wanted to move on. He wanted to keep Sadio Mane. He wanted to keep Gini Wijnaldum. He wanted to keep Dejan Lovren. He wanted to keep Adam Lallana, and one or two others. Milner. He wanted to keep Milner for one more season. So the loyalty of the manager is also a factor. It's not just purely on the ownership. So these are all factors too, which, again, you would hope that the manager has learned from. That, as much as he might love and be emotionally invested in some of these players, there has to be a time where he needs to almost emotionally detach himself, look at it purely based on the data and the evidence, which is, look, this player, his best days are done. And as much as I love him, maybe it's time to say goodbye. And again, we'll see that going into this forthcoming season. If one or two more of the older players have a poor season where they just simply can't perform at the levels they have done, will Klopp be ready and willing to let them go next summer? Quite. So, that's again why, in terms of lessons learned, just the evidence of the last few weeks is not enough to really make that judgment call. We're going to have to see out the remainder of this window, the forthcoming season, and then the summer of next year to see where the lessons truly have been learned.
Going into next season, I think our ambitions need to be matched. They need to be matched. Ambitions from fans, we just want to win. We want to be successful on the pitch. We don't care what happens, how much we pay for players. It's not our money. I just want to see the best of the best come in. I don't have to pay £100 million for players. Just the best tools that Klopp needs to go again and fight for trophies and give him this legacy he deserves. Because if he leaves with just one Premier League and one Champions League, I think that's an era that we look back on and think, wow, what happened there? We had one of the best managers in the world. And we're going to end it there then, guys, because we could talk all night about FSG. I certainly could anyway, Mo. I don't know about you, but I could talk about FSG all night. They need to back us, whether it's this summer and next summer. They can't just give us one summer and that's it. Fans need to keep the foot on them, by the way, because fans let them get away with a lot at the moment. And this PR, like we've been saying out throughout the whole podcast, has been spun and people are falling for it. Not many, some of us don't, like myself and Mo, and Rigo doesn't anymore. I don't know if he did before, actually, Rigo. I don't know if he did it before, but I know you don't anymore anyway. And if we want to be successful next season, we need to show that success in the transfer window as well as on the pitch. good start to the transfer window. Let's see if we can carry it on. Thanks for coming on anyway, Mo. Absolute pleasure to have you on. Hopefully we'll get back on next time. Maybe with a new owner. Next time we're back on. That would be nice, wouldn't it? That would be nice. It's been me, myself, Damon, Rigo, and Mo. It's been LFC Transfer Room podcast. Thank you for listening.